Hello, and welcome to Lyla's Lullabies, where we spend time exploring with Lyla, a traveler who wanders the world at her own pace, while sharing her most enriching and restorative moments with you. In tonight's story, we'll follow Lyla as she explores the endearing city of Montevideo, Uruguay. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to remember. Just settle in, get comfortable, and let yourself go. We're so glad you're here. Whenever you're ready, let's begin. The ferry from Buenos Aires crossed the Rio de la Plata in the soft light of early morning, and Lyla stood at the rail watching Uruguay emerge from the river mist. February in Montevideo meant the height of summer, carnival time, when the entire city gave itself over to music and celebration. But at this hour, with the sun just beginning to warm the air, everything felt peaceful, unhurried, full of gentle promise. The river was so wide here it felt more like a sea, the water brown with sediment, stretching away in every direction. Other boats moved across it, cargo ships heading upriver, smaller ferries making their crossings, a few sailboats catching the morning breeze. Gulls followed the ferry, calling and diving, their cries sharp against the rumble of the engines. Ciudad Vieja, the old city, appeared gradually as they approached the port. Colonial buildings in faded colors lined the waterfront, their architecture, speaking of Spanish influence, and centuries of river trade. Church towers rose above the rooflines, and beyond them, modern high-rises marked the newer parts of Montevideo, but here at the port, the past still dominated. The ferry docked with practiced ease, and passengers began gathering their things. Lyla had only her small bag, as always, and she was among the first to disembark, walking down the gangway onto Uruguayan soil. The port terminal was modest and efficient, and within minutes she was through and out onto the street. The air smelled different here, she noticed immediately. Still carrying salt from the river, but mixed with something else. The scent of coffee from a nearby café, the sweetness of ripe fruit from a vendor's cart, and underneath it all, something green and earthy that spoke of the pampas beyond the city. She had studied a map before arriving, but decided to navigate by instinct rather than strict planning. Ciudad Vieja was small enough to explore on foot, and she liked the idea of getting pleasantly lost, of letting the streets reveal themselves organically. The buildings around the port were working structures, warehouses and ship chandlers, offices for customs and maritime businesses. But as she walked inland, away from the water, the neighborhood began to change. The streets narrowed and the architecture became more residential, with balconies overhanging the sidewalks and shutters painted in blues and greens. It was still early, but the city was already awake. Shopkeepers were opening their doors, sweeping the sidewalks, arranging displays. A woman watered plants on her balcony, the water falling in a gentle arc to the street below. A man delivered bread from a basket on his bicycle, stopping at various buildings, calling out greetings to residents who appeared at windows. Lyla walked slowly, taking in the details. The buildings here showed their age in beautiful ways, paint peeling to reveal older colors beneath, stonework weathered and softened, iron railings rusted into lacy patterns. But there was care evident too, in the polished door knockers, the swept stoops, the carefully tended window boxes. She found herself on a wider street, more commercial, with cafes and small shops beginning their day. One cafe had its door open, chairs and tables arranged on the sidewalk, and the smell of coffee was irresistible. Lyla chose a table in the shade and sat down. A waiter appeared, middle-aged and friendly, with a white shirt and black apron. "Buenos días, ¿qué va a tomar?" "Buenos días," Lyla replied. "Un cortado, por favor." Enseguida. He brought the coffee quickly, served in a small glass, the espresso and steamed milk in perfect proportion. Lyla added half a spoonful of sugar and stirred, watching the café come to life around her. More customers arrived, mostly locals it seemed, people who knew the waiter by name and settled into their regular spots. Two men at the next table were discussing football, their conversation animated, hands gesturing as they debated some point about Nacional versus Peñarol, the city's rival teams. An older woman sat alone, reading the newspaper, occasionally making small noises of disapproval or interest at what she found there. Lyla sipped her coffee slowly. It was strong and good, with that particular South American character, bold and slightly bitter, perfectly balanced by the milk. She felt the caffeine begin to work, sharpening her attention, making the colors around her seem more vivid. When she finished, she paid and continued walking. The street led her deeper into Ciudad Vieja, and now she began to see signs of carnival everywhere. Posters advertising different comparsas, the carnival groups that would perform in the coming days. Murals painted on walls showing dancers and drummers, bright colors and dynamic movement. Storefronts decorated with streamers and banners. She could hear music too, faint but persistent, coming from somewhere nearby. The sound of drums practicing, the distinctive rhythm of candombe, the Afro-Uruguayan beat that was the heart of Montevideo's carnival. She followed the sound, curious. The music led her to a side street where a group had gathered in front of a community center. Drummers sat on chairs or stood in a loose circle, their instruments of various sizes creating a complex polyrhythm. The largest drums, the pianos, provided the bass heartbeat. The medium chico drums added the melody. The smallest repique drums danced over the top, improvising and responding. People had stopped to listen and watch. Some swayed gently to the rhythm, unable to resist the pull of the music. A few children tried to dance, imitating the movements of the older dancers who would perform in the actual carnival processions. Lyla stood at the edge of the gathering, letting the music wash over her. There was something hypnotic about candombe, the way the rhythms interlocked and supported each other, creating something greater than any individual part. She could feel it in her body, her heart adjusting to match the tempo, her shoulders wanting to move. The drummers played for perhaps 10 minutes, then stopped, laughing and talking among themselves, critiquing the performance, making adjustments. One of them noticed Lyla watching and smiled, raising his drumstick in a small salute. She smiled back and continued on her way, the rhythm still echoing in her mind. The street opened onto a plaza, small and tree-lined, with benches and a fountain at its center. A market was being set up, vendors arranging their stalls, displaying handmade jewelry, leather goods, paintings and crafts. It wasn't a large market, just a dozen or so vendors, but everything had that handmade quality, things created with care and attention. Lyla browsed slowly, stopping to examine a display of mate gourds, the traditional vessels for drinking yerba mate. They came in all sizes and designs, some simple and functional, others elaborately decorated with silver or carved patterns. The vendor, a woman with long gray hair and skilled hands, explained the differences. "This one is for beginners," she said, holding up a medium-sized gourd. "Not too small, easier to prepare. And this," she picked up a smaller one with silver decorations, "is for someone who drinks mate every day, who knows exactly what they're doing." Lyla didn't buy one. She wasn't sure she'd use it, but she appreciated the information, the vendor's obvious knowledge and passion for her craft. At another stall she found small prints of Montevideo landmarks, watercolors that captured the city's character with loose, expressive brushwork. One showed the Palacio Salvo, the iconic building she'd seen on the map. Another depicted the Rambla, the waterfront promenade. She chose a print of Teatro Solís, the grand theatre she planned to see later, and the artist rolled it carefully and slipped it into a protective tube. "You should go inside if you can," the artist said. "The theatre is beautiful, like going back in time." Lyla thanked her and tucked the tube into her bag. The market was fully alive now, more people arriving to browse and buy, vendors calling out their wares, conversations in Spanish mixing with the sound of the fountain and the birds in the trees. She sat on a bench for a while, just watching. A couple examined jewelry together, the man holding up different pieces while the woman considered, both of them laughing. A group of tourists took photos, their guide explaining something about the plaza's history. Children chased pigeons, their energy boundless despite the growing heat. The temperature was rising, the morning coolness giving way to February warmth. Lyla felt it on her skin, that particular South American summer heat, thick and encompassing. She was glad for her light clothing, the loose cotton dress and comfortable sandals. She left the plaza and continued exploring, the streets leading her in a meandering path through Ciudad Vieja. She passed more colonial buildings, some converted into museums or galleries, others still serving their original purposes as homes and businesses. The architecture was a mix of Spanish colonial, Italian influence from later immigration, and Art Deco from the early 20th century, all layered together in harmonious contradiction. She found the main street of the old city, Sarandi, which was closed to cars and filled with pedestrians. It was more touristy here, with souvenir shops and cafes designed for visitors, but still charming, the buildings well preserved, the atmosphere lively, without being overwhelming. Street performers had set up along the pedestrian way. A man played guitar and sang tangos, his voice gravelly and emotional. A woman created intricate sand art in bottles, pouring different colored sands to form landscapes and designs. A small group performed a comedy sketch, their timing perfect, drawing laughter from the gathered crowd. Lyla walked the length of the street, then turned toward where she knew Plaza Independencia would be, the large square that connected Ciudad Vieja to the newer city center. As she walked, the buildings began to change, becoming taller, more modern, though still interspersed with older structures. Then the plaza opened before her, vast and impressive. At one end stood the Palacio Salvo, the building from her print, a towering structure that was part Gothic, part Art Deco, uniquely Uruguayan. At the other end, the entrance to Ciudad Vieja was marked by the remains of the old city gate, a stone archway that had once been part of the fortification walls. In the center of the plaza stood the Artigas Mausoleum, a monument to Uruguay's founding father, José Gervasio Artigas. The plaza itself was spacious and open, with paths crossing it, trees providing shade, and benches where people sat and rested. Lyla walked across the plaza slowly, feeling the space around her. There was something about large urban squares that invited contemplation, the way they created emptiness in the midst of density, breathing room, in the city's fabric. She approached Teatro Solís, which occupied one side of the plaza. The theatre was magnificent, its neoclassical facade pristine, with columns and statuary, balconies and elaborate stonework. The building exuded culture and history, a temple to the performing arts. A sign indicated tours were available, and Lyla decided to take one. She went inside, where it was cool and dim, her eyes adjusting from the bright sunlight. The lobby was elegant, with marble floors and ornate details, chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. A small group was gathering for the next tour, and Lyla joined them. The guide, a young woman with infectious enthusiasm, welcomed everyone, and began leading them through the theatre. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. The main auditorium was horseshoe-shaped, with multiple levels of balconies, each one decorated with gold leaf and velvet. The ceiling was painted with elaborate frescoes, and an enormous crystal chandelier hung at the center, sparkling even in the dim light. Teatro Solís opened in 1856, the guide explained. It's the oldest theater in Uruguay and has hosted some of the world's greatest performers. Caruso sang here, Pavlova danced here, the greatest orchestras have played here. They toured the backstage areas, seeing the dressing rooms and the warren of corridors that allowed performers and crew to move unseen. They saw the stage from the wings, imagining what it must feel like to step out into that space, to face an audience of hundreds. Lyla loved these glimpses behind the scenes, the practical magic of theatre revealed. She thought about all the performances that had happened here, all the stories told, all the emotions shared between performers and audiences. The building held all of it, every note of music, every spoken line, layered into its walls. When the tour concluded, she thanked the guide and stepped back out into the bright afternoon. The sun was high now, the heat serious, and she realized she was hungry. She made her way back into Ciudad Vieja, looking for somewhere to have lunch. She found a small parrilla, a traditional Uruguayan grill restaurant, its windows open to let in whatever breeze might find its way through. Inside, it was simple and honest. Wooden tables, paper placemats, a blackboard listing the day's offerings. She ordered the asado, the traditional mixed grill, wanting to try the local specialty. While she waited, the waiter brought her a basket of bread and a small dish of chimichurri, the herbed sauce that accompanied every grilled meat in this part of the world. The food arrived on a small grill at the table, still sizzling, the various cuts of meat arranged on it, chorizo, morcilla, short ribs, and what might have been sweetbreads. It was more food than she needed, but she ate slowly, savoring the flavors, the meat perfectly cooked, charred on the outside and tender within. With the meal came a simple salad and some fried potatoes, and she was grateful for the vegetables, freshness after the richness of the meat. For drink, she ordered a medio y medio, the classic Uruguayan cocktail made from half white wine and half sparkling wine, refreshing and light. The restaurant filled up as she ate, locals coming in for their midday meal, the largest of the day here. Conversations flowed around her, discussions of work and family, plans for carnival celebrations, everyday concerns, and small joys. She loved being anonymous in this way, present but not participating, able to observe without obligation. After lunch she felt the pull of siesta, that universal midday rest that made sense in this heat. She found a park, the Plaza Matriz, right in the heart of Ciudad Vieja, with the Metropolitan Cathedral on one side and old colonial buildings on the others. Large trees provided shade, and she found a bench beneath one, sitting back and watching the plaza's quiet afternoon life. An old man fed pigeons, scattering breadcrumbs in careful arcs. A woman sat on another bench, knitting, her needles clicking in steady rhythm. Children played a quiet game, their parents watching from nearby. Lyla closed her eyes, not sleeping but resting, letting the food settle, letting the heat wash over her. She could hear the sounds of the city. Distant traffic, the cooing of doves, someone practicing scales on a piano in one of the surrounding buildings, the notes floating out an open window. Time drifted, the shadows shifted, the heat seemed to intensify and then, gradually, begin to ease as the afternoon progressed toward evening. When Lyla opened her eyes, she felt refreshed, ready to continue exploring. The city was waking from siesta too, shops reopening, people emerging back onto the streets. But there was a different energy now, an anticipation. Carnival performances would begin in the evening, and the city was preparing. Lyla walked toward the Rambla, the waterfront promenade that stretched for miles along Montevideo's coast. The walk took her through transitional neighborhoods, where Ciudad Vieja gave way to the port area, and then to residential districts, each with its own character. When she reached the Rambla, the view opened up dramatically. The Rio de la Plata stretched away to the horizon, its water reflecting the late afternoon sky. The promenade was wide and inviting, with a dedicated lane for walkers, and another for cyclists, separated from the street by a grassy median. People were out enjoying the cooler temperature, families with strollers, couples holding hands, groups of friends, solitary walkers like herself. Some sat on the low wall that edged the promenade, facing the water, watching the sun begin its descent. Lyla walked along the Rambla, enjoying the space and the breeze coming off the water. Every so often, there were small beaches, narrow strips of sand where people swam or sunbathed. Children played in the shallows, their laughter carrying on the wind. She walked until she found a stretch that was quieter, less crowded, and she sat on the wall, her feet dangling, looking out at the water. The river was calmer here, protected by a breakwater, its surface rippling gently. A fishing boat puttered past, heading back to port, its deck piled with nets and equipment. Further out, a sailboat moved slowly across the view, its white sail bright against the darkening water. The light was beginning to change, that golden hour approaching when everything would be painted in warm tones. Lyla sat for a long time, content to simply be present. She thought about the day, about the ferry crossing at dawn and the coffee in the café. the drummers practicing candombe and the tour of Teatro Solís, the heavy lunch and the peaceful siesta. Each moment had been its own small gift. As the sun lowered, more people arrived at the Rambla, gathering for the sunset, a daily ritual. Someone started playing guitar, a mellow folk song, and a few people sang along. The atmosphere was gentle, communal, everyone there to mark the day's ending together. The sun touched the horizon, and the sky began its transformation. Colors bloomed, orange and pink, purple and gold, layers upon layers shifting and evolving. The water reflected it all, becoming a mirror of the sky. The city behind them was silhouetted, buildings going dark, while the heavens blazed. People fell quiet, watching. Even the children stopped playing, drawn by the spectacle. For those few minutes, everyone was united in appreciation of this daily miracle, this reminder of beauty and continuity. When the sun finally slipped below the horizon, a few people applauded, spontaneous and sincere. Then, gradually, everyone began to disperse, heading home, or to dinner, to evening plans and carnival preparations. Lyla walked back toward Ciudad Vieja, the streetlights beginning to come on, casting pools of warm light along the sidewalks. The city was transforming again, becoming its nighttime self, and she wanted to see what that looked like, especially during carnival. As she walked, she began to hear music, not one source but many, different rhythms competing and blending. Carnival was beginning, groups gathering in various neighborhoods, preparing for the evening celebrations. She followed the sound of drums, letting it guide her back into the old city. The streets were busier now, people dressed in costume, faces painted, groups moving with purpose toward gathering points. The energy was building, festive and warm, everyone caught up in the celebration. She found herself on a street that had been closed to traffic, where a comparsa was preparing to perform. The drummers were assembling, dozens of them, adjusting their instruments, warming up with quick bursts of rhythm. Dancers were stretching and chatting, their costumes elaborate and colorful, sequins catching the streetlight. Spectators lined both sides of the street, people leaning from balconies, families staking out good viewing spots. Vendors moved through the crowd selling drinks and snacks, their calls adding to the general noise and excitement. Lyla found a spot near the front, where she could see clearly. The atmosphere was charged but not frantic, anticipatory in the best way. Around her, people chatted and laughed, friends greeting each other, strangers becoming companions through shared experience. Then, with a signal she didn't see, the comparsa began. The drums started together, that unmistakable candombe rhythm, complex and driving, impossible to resist. The sound was enormous, enveloping, filling the street, and echoing off the buildings. The dancers began to move, their choreography both structured and improvised, bodies responding to the rhythm with joy and skill. They moved down the street in a procession, the drummers following, and the whole group created a river of movement and sound, pulling everyone along with it. Lyla felt the music in her chest, felt her body wanting to move with it. Around her, people were dancing too, clapping, singing, caught up in the celebration. It was infectious, this joy, this communal expression of life and culture and identity. The comparsa passed, moving down the street, and the crowd followed, everyone becoming part of the procession. Lyla let herself be carried along, walking behind the drummers, surrounded by dancers and spectators, all moving together through the old city streets. They passed through different neighborhoods, the procession picking up more people as it went. Windows opened and people cheered from above, throwing confetti that drifted down like colorful snow. Children ran alongside, trying to keep up, their faces bright with excitement. The music never stopped, the drummers playing continuously, sweat gleaming on their faces, their hands moving in blur, faster than the eye could follow. The dancers never tired, their energy seeming endless, fed by the rhythm and the crowd's enthusiasm. Eventually, the procession reached a larger plaza, where multiple comparsas were converging, the space filled with people, with music, with movement and color and life. Different rhythms competed and merged, creating a joyful chaos, a celebration that felt ancient and modern at once. Lyla found a spot at the edge where she could watch it all, where she could be part of it without being overwhelmed by it. She saw families dancing together, children on parents' shoulders. She saw teenagers in groups, trying new moves, laughing at their mistakes. She saw elderly couples swaying gently, decades of shared dances in their movements. The celebration would continue for hours, she knew, probably until dawn. But she didn't need to stay for all of it. She had experienced the heart of it, had felt the rhythm and the joy, had been welcomed into this expression of Uruguayan culture. She began to make her way back through the streets, the music following her, fading gradually as she put distance between herself and the plaza. Ciudad Vieja, at night, was magical, the old buildings glowing in the streetlight, shadows deep and mysterious, music and voices drifting from every direction. She found a quiet café that was still open despite the carnival, its few tables occupied by people taking a break from the celebrations. She ordered a cortado and a glass of water and sat at a table by the window, watching people pass on the street. The coffee was good, warming her despite the evening's mildness. She felt pleasantly tired, her feet aching slightly from all the walking, her mind full of images and sounds and sensations from the day. When she finished, she paid and began walking toward the port, where she would catch the late ferry back to Buenos Aires. The streets were quieter here, away from the carnival center, though she could still hear the drums in the distance, a constant heartbeat underlying the city. The ferry terminal was lit but peaceful, a handful of other passengers waiting for the night crossing. Lyla boarded when they called, climbing the stairs to the upper deck, wanting to watch Montevideo recede into the night. The ferry pulled away from the dock, and the city spread out before her, lights marking its extent, the old city and the new, the waterfront stretching away in both directions. The sound of carnival carried across the water, faint but persistent, a reminder of the celebration continuing without her. She found a seat and wrapped a blanket around herself that the ferry provided for the night crossing. The air was cooler on the water, the breeze steady, carrying the scent of the river. Other passengers settled in, some sleeping immediately, others reading or looking at their phones. A couple stood at the rail, arms around each other, watching the city fade. An older man sat nearby, humming softly to himself, perhaps one of the carnival tunes still playing in his head. Lyla leaned back in her seat, comfortable and at peace. The day had been full, rich with experience and sensation. She thought about the drumming, the way it had moved through her body like a second heartbeat. She thought about Teatro Solís and its elegant history. She thought about the sunset on the Rambla and the taste of the asado and the feeling of being part of something larger than herself during the carnival procession. The ferry moved steadily across the dark water, its lights reflected on the surface, its engine a constant low rumble. Above, stars appeared, competing with the lights from both shores. The Rio de la Plata stretched around them, vast and patient, connecting Argentina and Uruguay, carrying boats and commerce and culture between two countries that shared so much history. Lyla closed her eyes, not sleeping but resting, listening to the water against the hull, the wind in the railings, the quiet conversations of other passengers. She felt grateful for the day, for the chance to experience Montevideo during Carnival, to witness that expression of joy and tradition. The rhythm of the candombe drum still echoed in her mind, that complex pattern that spoke of African roots and Uruguayan identity, of resistance and celebration, of sorrow and joy intertwined. She could feel it still, subtle, but present, a gift the city had given her, that she would carry forward. The crossing would take a few hours, and she had no need to rush it. For now she was exactly where she wanted to be, suspended between two cities, two countries, cradled by the river, surrounded by the night, peaceful and content, holding the day's memories like treasures, gentle and warm and lasting.